Okay. Anyways, it was a good book. I enjoyed reading it. So I will explain first why I contacted you. Basically, the last few years have been doing some research on my late grandfather, Dato Harun Idris, either famous or infamous, depending on your point of view.
Right.
And the reason why I started it was because probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I managed to get a copy of his diaries that he wrote. They're here.
Yeah.
So it's like they were written when he was serving time in Pudu jail at the time where he was having some strife against his leader at the time, both Tun Razak and Tun Hussein on. So it's quite interesting read. Obviously, lots of things are mentioned there. And I'm just trying to collect as many different points of view on his story to get hopefully a balanced view. So I want to ask you, YB, what's your initial memories of Dato Harun? If you think of him.
I don't have any direct dealings with him. In fact, until May 13, I don't think I ever had any dealings with him. But of course, then May 13 took place, and there were all sorts of stories.
Yeah.
And even and of course, I have no first-hand knowledge. It was all various stories, and Harun make a threat at that time when Parliament was going to meet, that if the constitutional amendments were not passed through, UMNO youth will surround the building to ensure that the constitutional amendments were passed. But even then, I don't have any dealings with him at all until Semangat 46, when he was one of the personalities involved. So that will be in the 80s, in the late 80s. So I had I think I met him only in the late 80s, and that was not much deep involvement at all.
Okay, I mean, he mentions you a couple of times in his diaries, but he was in jail at the time. So he was more commentating. I guess in jail you're a bit bored, right? So you will try to keep up to date with news. So he will comment on, say, for example, DAP internal, elections, and there's one other particular place where he mentions you on your comment about the Societies Amendment Act, which I'll hope to ask you about later. So I mean, I think
that will be about the 1980s Societies Act.
That's in 81 actually.
81.
So let's go back a little bit. And you're right. I think most people nowadays, or how it's portrayed nowadays, is my grandfather gets remembered a lot, mostly infamously for May 13th actually. So what's your view on that? What can you tell me from your point of view?
As I said, I have no first-hand knowledge. I was never in KL at the time.
Yeah.
But there was there were stories, and there was gathering in Harun's house, and then the May 13th sparked off at the time. So exactly what transpired, I mean, I will know. We will know. Yeah.
But do you have a view on it? Do you think he did it? So for example, I asked this to everyone I've interviewed. So I interviewed Tun Dr Mahathir, Tun Musahitam as well. So what I read, for example, in say Tun Abdul Rahman's shadow biographies, or even characters like Ghazali Shafi'i, ex-interior minister, is that there is this implication, or even in some of Tengku's books, a direct mentioning, saying that, this Dato Harun Dr. Mahathir and Tun Razak are the three young Turks, in UMNO that were trying to initiate things. Do you have a view on that?
I don't have, because as I said, I don't have a first-hand knowledge. I don't know what exactly transpired, and that was why in Parliament, in my speech on my first speech, I called for a commission inquiry. So that exactly where and what and how can be established. So I mean, otherwise it is based on various tales and stories which may or may not be true.
So of course, in the end, they established the NOC, of which Tun Razak was the chair.
Yeah.
And under him, of course, there were figures like Tun Dr Ismail and Tun Samantan. I think Tun Hanif Omar was on the police kind of investigative side. They came out with a report on it in the end. What do you think of the report? Were you happy with the conclusion, or?
Of course, there was a NOC report, and which we found one-sided, because we were accused of all sorts of things. But as I said, I have no information exactly at that time, and I think in the absence of actual information, it's very difficult. The report we felt was slanted to one side.
Yeah, and for me, as part of this project, you end up having to read kind of quite broadly, and I ended up picking up, say for example, Tun Dr Ismail's biographies written by Wiki Beng. And I was surprised actually to find that in that book, he mentioned that one of the first reactions of Tun Dr Ismail was that he wanted to arrest. The quote is he wanted to arrest Harun for murder, which is quite a strong quote to start off with. And of course, in Tun Hanif's comments later on, I think you can Google these things. He mentions that the other two who were very adamant that my grandfather was to blame was Hamzah Abu Samah and Tun Sambantan. So because the two of them were adamant that my grandfather had a role to play, Tun Razak put them in charge of the NOC. And of course, in Tun Dr Ismail's biographies, in the end, it mentioned that my grandfather, or from what they concluded after external audit on the report and things, that my grandfather didn't do it. But I agree that there's going to be disagreement over this, forever, I think, unfortunately. I was watching a video of you yesterday on YouTube on which you were talking about May 13th and that it's haunted Malaysia, all these years. And you were talking about exorcising the ghosts of May 13th. Do you think we've done that as a country in the last few years?
Well, there was that slim book by Slimming on May 13, and but of course, I said these are all very various accounts, and I really don't know because I don't have any first-hand information, and in the absence of a full inquiry, a proper inquiry, it is as good as anybody's guess.
Yeah. What's the difference between
and who is right, who is wrong? We really don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what's the difference between a full inquiry and the NOC investigation? What would be the difference?
The NOC investigation is very one-sided, and of course, it doesn't take into account. It may take into account official account, but official accounts, as you know, is about to be one-sided. And there is a full inquiry, which allows different people to give their versions of events and to be challenged as to the veracity of it. That is a different story. So, but I mean, in no position to say one thing or another, because I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it's well documented. You were in Sabah. There's no, you know,
Yeah,
you didn't
actually,
have
I
any.
left that morning. I
Yeah,
left that morning
no.
on May 13, and
Yeah.
to help the independent candidate in KK, William Lai, and it was whispered to me during our public rally that something has happened, and of course it's not possible at that time to know what exactly happened.
Yeah, and I think just to get a DAP point of view, obviously in Selangor there was a split, right, in terms of the election results. I think DAP managed to win 9 seats and Gerakan had 4. And there was one spare independent chap called Mr. Lim Kit Siang. I think he was former MCA.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, the kind of head of
a stalemate.
Yeah, stalemate. And on the DAP side of things, the one in charge, correct me if I'm wrong, was a guy called Goh Hock Guan.
He was the Secretary General at the time.
Yeah, so obviously you couldn't influence, even though you were in the party and high up in the leadership. Obviously, there's no WhatsApp and handphones at the time, so communication is not as quick as now. But were there any plans beforehand to form a coalition with Gerakan, or did you hear about anything like that?
I think Goh Hock Guan was attempting to form a coalition government, and which was impossible because it is a stalemate. Even if the non-alliance parties get together, it's still it's not a majority. But how it will work out is something which I think that was something which struck off the tension, because Harun never expected to possibly lose power, and he never expected, and that is something at that time. In fact, if we looking back to 1969, the DAP never expected to win more than 2 or 3 seats. We didn't expect to do very well. Okay. And we ourselves were surprised at the results, that it was quite a sweep in the urban areas. And so it took the political leaders by surprise, the results. And apparently for both sides, in the government and in opposition, they were not prepared. They were not prepared for that type of results. They were not ready for it. Yeah. Whereas we should learn from the process. It's something for Malaysians to learn, that you must accept to be in government or in opposition. But if the government is not ready and prepared to be in opposition, then you have the situation of unexpected to take place.
Yeah, and I think an important figure, maybe a lot of people my generation are not familiar with, somebody called Dr. or Tan Chee Khoon, who was opposition leader in Selangor for quite a while, and if you read, quite formidable opposition leader as well. What's your memories of him?
Well, I think by May the 13th, by the 12th, the results were on the, I imagine, were known in the early hours of on the 11th.
Yeah.
11th morning. So on the 11th, on the 12th, there will be attempts to form a government. But I think by the 12th, according to accounts that we have read, Tan Chee Khoon has made it very clear that he will not agree to any form of a coalition government, and that I think by the 13th, Harun should be quite certain they should be able to form a government. But then they were overtaken by events of May 13th.
Yeah, and actually, I managed to dig out an article written by the late Tan Chee Khoon, specifically detailing this sequence of events. So I think it matches what you were saying, that by the time, even though it was a stalemate, because, or rather Tan Chee Khoon writes that there was a pre-agreement that if Gerakan and DAP managed to win the state outright, or together could form a majority, then they would have. But because it was a stalemate, they opted not to. And I think it agrees with what you just said, that by the time the 13th came around, that Gerakan had already officially kind of said, both Tan Chee Khoon and V. David had passed on the message to my grandfather that they're not going to form, they're not planning to do anything, that he should go ahead and form the state assembly. But by the time, obviously, things had started to erupt on the outside, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. I think it's a useful conversation to have. I still feel as a young person that we haven't really dealt with this story.
But I don't know I have no personal knowledge. I just guess on it.
Of course, yeah. But it's still good to know from all sides, I think, right? It's still useful to know. Okay. Yeah, have you got anything else to say about that? Any wisdoms to share?
That's all I have to say. As I said, I don't have direct dealings with Harun.
Yeah.
So I also have go by accounts of other people.
Of course, yeah. So let's move on to him as a politician, just in general. Obviously, he was a Menteri Besar in Selangor, the longest serving Menteri Besar. And I'm sure as a member or a fellow politician, you would have had to not deal directly with him, but you would have to strategize about him, I suppose, how to debate certain things and whatnot. How did you find that? Did you have to attend any meetings about him or what he was doing in the state, anything like that?
I not very much that I can recall. Of course, this half a century ago.
Of course, yeah.
But at that time, I was a small fish also,
Yeah.
a non-entity, and so we were on a different online, so we don't really come into contact very much. So we don't have much dealings until, as I said, in the 80s, in the Semangat days lah. So as the 60s, 70s, until he went to jail in the 76, 77, I think. There was hardly any contact with him.
Okay.
So I'm unable to give any personal impressions as such.
Yeah, that's okay. And obviously he got into trouble eventually around the time of the Muhammad Ali versus Joe Buckner fight in Kuala Lumpur.
Now, this is what we read in the press, as I read in the press. But
yeah. And do you have any thoughts about that? When he was charged for one charge of basically corruption, 250,000 ringgit in relation to the Hong Kong and Shanghai bank case, which he argued that the money was taken on behalf of Pemuda UMNO, and he never benefited from it. Actually, I have the judgment by the written judgment by one of the judges. And then, of course, in the second case to do with Bank Rakyat was criminal breach of trust and forgery. Were you following the case at the time?
Not exactly.
No.
But of course, there was allegations of corruption.
Yeah.
But compared to present times, those are small fish.
Yeah. Exactly.
Compared to one MDB, what is that?
But it sets an interesting case to refer back to. I think that's why I feel it's so important to know about this particular case now. So I hope people will read a bit more around it and make a comparison. Actually, I think it'll be quite useful exercise. When he eventually got found guilty, he appealed all the way to Privy Council, was unsuccessful. came back to Malaysia. And because he had such a strong grassroots following, I have a report with me that states that when he landed back in Subang Airport in February of 78, there were about 2,000 people waiting for him at Subang, which is quite a feat in a pre-social media age, I suppose. And UMNO youth then decided to barricade him in the house, refusing to let him go to Pudu jail when the directive came. I mean, do you have any recollection of that? It must have been quite tense time.
Recollection as reported in the press, the confrontation, the barricade, the work of and he's finally surrendering himself to the authorities.
Were you in KL at the time?
I cannot remember exactly.
I remember. That's okay. That's okay. So of course he goes to jail, and once somebody goes to jail, it's always very difficult to get any progress, I suppose, out of your political career, as evidenced by more recent cases as well, I think. He did surrender himself to jail out of the standoff. He kind of snuck himself out of the house, was brought to GHKL first, and then from GHKL he was brought to Pudu. So whilst he was in jail, he was writing these diaries, obviously, that I've read. And let's just move on to the fact that he mentioned you a couple of times. One, I told you in passing about the DAP elections, internal, I suppose usual politics, internal party politics.
Yeah.
And the second one was to do with the Societies Amendment Act. I have the quote. I actually saw the headline. They actually headlined your quote, which is to say that this is the death of democracy in Malaysia. Do you remember why you said that? Because I have no idea what this act is about, and I couldn't figure out why was there such a fuss about it.
What I can remember is that there were intense opposition to the amendment to the Societies Act, which would enable the government to be able to intervene directly with our operations. I cannot remember exactly what it was at that time. And I think at that time, Anwar was quite involved in that, and there was quite a major society movement against the opposition, and in opposition to the amendments to the Societies Act.
Okay,
but I have to refer back to the past to recall what exactly those events are.
Yeah, I know. I always find it. I feel sorry when I ask these questions because they were so long ago.
You're getting old, and it's not easy to recall the earlier years.
I know, but unfortunately, there's times where I've showed up somewhere and somebody has either fallen ill or they're not with us anymore, and then that's the full stop. So I still think it's a worthwhile exercise to chat to experienced people such as yourself. So interestingly, I actually wrote to Dr. Mahathir about this, about the Societies Amendment Act, because my grandfather thought from prison that one of the reasons why they were in such a hurry to pass this act was to stop him from holding any posts, political posts, because at that time it was coming to the UMNO AGM, and there was plans afoot whether my grandfather wanted to actually stand for against the president, against Tun Hussein, because he had such a raucous interaction with him at the time. But eventually he stood for a vice president seat, and he won from Pudu jail, I suppose, first time ever and last time. After that, they've stopped that possibility. So I asked Dr. Mahathir whether that was the case, because he was Deputy Prime Minister at the time. And he replied in about few words just to say, I suppose so.
I really don't know.
I'm just telling you. I'm just telling you. Just an interesting historical fact. So and he got a royal pardon in 1981 a partial pardon to start off with. Just reflecting on that, I mean, it's quite interesting that he was charged, found guilty, got the pardon. Do you have any reactions to that at the time? Were you just indifferent, going on with your own life, your own problems?
I don't think it really it had much of an impact on us in actual operations. So I think we're just following events.
Okay, so tell me about the Semangat days then. Tell me about your interactions with him at the time, even if it was little interactions. What was it like?
There was no personal interaction. It was more political interaction. In terms of that, when he became 81, he became prime minister, and after that, his years as a PM-ship. So those are more political than personal. I don't have any personal relationship with him in those years.
And even in that political kind of relationship, did you have a view about his politics or the kind of politician he was? What was your assessment of him?
Well, I think the problems we have today will have to stem from those times.
Yeah,
that's why I fully supported Nazir's call for a reset of national policies and institutions, so that we must we do not end up in the future as a failed state. We have such promises and talents, and we must be able to maximize and make full use of them.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that statement as well. I mean, reflecting on my grandfather's career, a lot of people unfortunately pigeonhole him as this kind of rabid Malay nationalist character, but he was also the manager of Malaysian football team. In fact, the most multiracial and successful team. So as part of this project, I interviewed people like Dato Sochin An and Dato Santot Singh, and I asked them the same questions. What was my grandfather, such a rabid, racist, ultra Malay nationalist? And they were like, no, basically, he was very, very good with everyone. So I find that strange. Why the paradox? So I was trying to get a viewpoint maybe from you. Maybe if you had any thoughts about that.
Somehow we have lost our way, so we must find our way back.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of that. Okay, YB, thank you very much for the brief conversation. I appreciate your time a lot.
I cannot be of much help because I don't have a direct personal relationship with Harun. Yeah,
it's okay. I'm trying my best to get as many views as possible, different types of worldviews and points of view. I think that's the best way to deal with these things.
Okay, the best to your search.
Okay, thank you, Ivy.
Thank you. Bye.